Welcome to Unbossed, where we are flipping the script on leadership. I am Stacy Wright, the founder and CEO of Heart Profit, and I'm here today with Gloria St. Martin Lowry. That is quite a name.
It is. It's really long. Glow for short. So just glow.
Glow. We're here with
Right.
Glow, the president of HBWP. She has been teaching compassionate leadership for over 30 years, or HBWP has been. So Gloria is here with us to talk about that. And so today, what we were going to talk about, today we're going to talk about one of our creeds that talks about trust and transparency. And some of the things that when you talk about changing your work environment to an environment that is conducive for mental well-being for all of your people, when you're creating a culture that cares about people, that implements compassion, transparency and trust is a huge building block of the foundation that allows you to be that compassionate leader without being taken advantage of, without having the issues that we've had in the past when we just add compassion and not the whole framework for compassionate leadership. So this is one of the building blocks, the transparency and trust. And I know for me personally, I remember the first time I started really looking at this, I had a friend actually, and she was a manager, she was a supervisor in a large corporation, and she was super committed to her role and she loved her boss. And I was very enamored with that. I was very interested in what is it about your job that you love so much? She was in charge of shipping. Like it was not an exciting, sexy job, but she was so passionate about it. And so when I asked her questions, she started talking about her boss and how her boss trusts her and her boss gives her information. And her boss actually, and she came up through the ranks. Like she started as a shipping clerk and moved up to a shipping supervisor, and then she was a shipping manager. Her boss, who was the COO, would sit down with her and show her the financials and go through all the financials of the company with her and then explain to her how her role impacts the finances of the corporation and what the goals are of the corporation and how her job impacts that. And having that trust put in her gave her such a feeling of connectedness, a feeling, I don't know, like it gave her that zest for her job and that commitment. And she was always looking at how can I save the company money? How can I create more revenue? How can I help the bottom line? Because all of the managers were empowered with this knowledge about here's the financials. There was no secrets involved. So that really struck me. And what really struck me was her commitment to her boss and to the company. And I thought that's what we want to breed, and I think that transparency and trust was a huge part of that. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Gloria, do you want to say anything on the opening of this, or are you ready to jump in?
I say we just jump in because that opening was a great example of the impact that trust has. Is it creates that it creates the value for the person, and when
Mhm.
people feel valued and trusted, anything is possible.
Okay, and that is what we're going to unpack today in our talk today. So what's happening in the workplace today? We're talking about the workplaces we have today. There's a lot of fear that people just in general have. There's a lot of lack of trust. There's a lot of, and a lot of it stems from the leadership not feeling comfortable being transparent. But
Yeah.
when we have the culture that we have right now, if we talk about what we're doing right now with the command and control and not a lot of transparency or trust, what does that look like in the workplace today?
Yeah. And we're also dealing with a lot of uncertainty,
That's
which
true.
heightens some concerns with trust, right? If there's uncertainty in the world and in business in our own organizations, what do we share? What don't we share? Leaders can become paralyzed when information doesn't flow to team members. That just makes the skepticism increase. And
You know,
when
that's a
they don't get information, they start to I hate to say make it up, but they start to think about what it might be or what might be the causes.
Right? That's a really good point. We're living in a society where there's a mental health crisis. And so people are feeling there is a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear, a lot of not knowing what's going to happen. And when that happens, people can start overthinking. They can start being paranoid. They can start seeing things that aren't there. So it's almost like the trust and transparency is not a luxury anymore. It's actually something that's required to create a culture of psychological safety, to help people calm down a little bit just because of the society we live in. So it's almost like it's not just important for your business, but it's important for people in general.
And when times are tough, that transparency is even more critical, right? And we tend to, when times get tough, we tend to shut down. We tend
Mhm.
to tighten the circle up. We tend to be more cautious about what we share. And we shouldn't. We should do the opposite. We should involve and engage people. We should share what we can. We should listen to their concerns and their fears over what's happening in the company or what decisions are being made. Because when we do that, then people are going to be more open. They're going to help. They're much more likely to jump in and help and make an impact.
Let's talk about tough conversations and the role that plays in trust and transparency. Because we did talk about performance coaching. We talked about positive reinforcement in a couple of our last sessions. What role does the difficult conversation piece play in the trust and transparency?
If you can have some of the tougher conversations, whether it be on performance of an individual or challenges in the company, when you can have more open discussion on that, I mean, those aren't necessarily easy, but when you don't shy away from them, then what you're doing is creating more of that culture of openness, that culture of psychological safety, that culture of trust, right? Which is we're all in this together. And so we need to talk through some of these things, whether it be one-on-one kind of performance issue or whether it be here are the challenges we're experiencing as a company. We got to resist the temptation to lean away and focus on leaning in, even if it may be uncomfortable to get started.
And that's super hard in general. When times get tough, it's like for me as a leader, when times get tough, I want to isolate. I want to come in. I want to figure out what's going on before I come out and talk to my people.
Yep.
So and I think about, I think about my dad. He was a pastor of a church. So he spent his whole life as a leader. And in that generation, you didn't show fear and weakness. If you did show fear and weakness, then you weren't seen as a leader. And I think that we're coming on the tail end of that, thank God, because as a leader, I can only imagine the pressure that he was under to have all the answers and to not show weakness and to show that he had the trust and the faith and to move forward. But that's not how we have to be today. As leaders,
Yeah.
we found that transparency and authenticity and vulnerability actually leads to more trust, which leads to more connectedness, which leads to, if you're talking about what makes an effective leader, it's having committed people and
Absolutely.
building a team. So what are some of the myths that leaders have today when it comes to transparency? So what are some of the things that they think that, oh, I can't be transparent about that because,
Yeah, it is we make negative assumptions about people and what they'll do with information. We make, we say, well, we can't share stuff with them because they'll then share it and that we can't risk that. They also say out of the goodness of their hearts or with great intent, I don't want to burden my
mm,
team with this, right? This isn't anything that they should have to deal with. I'm the leader. I'll take care of it. So we then, you know, even subconsciously, unconsciously grab more control rather than say, okay, well, let's keep the communication lines open. And I think a lot of that stems from we've been sort of groomed and taught and leadership has been modeled for us that we keep an arm's distance, we keep that arm's length from
yeah.
our team. And if we start building connection and relationships from the onset when we first start working together, then it makes the rest of that stuff easier. We're less likely to not want to burden them with, the tough stuff about what's going on with the company. We're much more likely to engage in a conversation about performance because we care about them. We know
Hmm.
they're a good person. And we know that if we bring this problem to their attention and try to focus on problem solving, that it will have a better outcome. So our mindset shifts if we can kind of start from the beginning, because otherwise we just play the game of, well, but
Mhm.
They don't need to know. Well, but don't burden them with that. Well, but that's not their role. That's my job to take care of these things.
Yeah, can we break down just some of those myths a little bit in greater detail and have maybe some answers for those myths? Because those are great points and something I felt in my leadership journey is that one is I don't trust my people. Like, will they keep this confidential?
Yeah,
Or two, I don't trust that they'll be able to handle the
right.
the problem, or I don't want to burden them. So all of those things very much I've experienced all of those things. So what would you say to a leader that says, this is really confidential and I really don't want my competitors knowing this information, and I'm afraid if I share that with my people that it's going to get out. What do you say to them and how do they handle that situation?
Yeah, for me, I adopt the curious mindset and I ask questions. Well, tell me more about why you don't trust them. What worries you about this? What's the worst that's going to happen? Because the reality is, those fears can be real because if we're entrusted with this information, we don't want competitors having it. We are going to be leery about it getting into their hands. And do I trust my do I trust the people on my team? Do I trust the people that I work with or not? And if we can ask ourselves that question, say, I trust my team, well, then great. What we do is we give some parameters. What we do is we say, here's some information, and we have to really, the expectation is that this is confidential. This does not leave the company.
Okay.
Set the expectation, people will follow through. And
Hmm.
you don't need to give people the full-fledged breakdown of the report that shows all the information about, the business operations. Talk them through. Here are the challenges that we're facing.
Hmm.
But most leaders, when you ask them, well, tell me what concerns do you have? Tell me why don't you trust your team? Is it one person? Is it the whole team? No, it's usually some fear,
It
right?
may be something that happened in the past with a whole different people, a whole different group of
Exactly.
people.
A previous experience, their own uncertainty about the relationship with their boss, that their relationship might not be as solid. And so they're concerned that if something happens, it puts them at risk.
Hmm.
We can still share information with folks to give them a picture, also at the same time without giving every line item detail.
Okay. So really, there's a couple steps there. Like if you're feeling worried about sharing information because it's confidential, you need to have a team you trust. So
Yeah,
that's really core is hire the right people, make sure you're trusting your people. If there's a problem with trust, address it with that person
exactly.
versus withholding information from the entire company because you don't trust this one person. So that's one thing. So we're not just sharing information with everybody willy-nilly. We are making sure their trust is going both ways.
Right.
Got it. Okay. And so then it's being smart about what information is relevant
Yeah,
and that helps them do, with everything that they need to know to do their job well.
exactly. It is sitting saying, here's the situation. We may have lost a customer. We may be, let's talk about real world stuff today. We're,
Mhm.
we're going to be impacted by tariffs. Well, rather than wait until you know what the impact is, you have the opportunity to be a little more open to say, yeah, you guys are probably concerned about the impact on tariffs for our company, and that is something that has us concerned as a company as well. And
Mhm.
we're in the stages of looking at that to see what the impacts are. I'll share more information when I can. And I'm going to take that as an opportunity to say, I'd really like your guys' thoughts and ideas because I think we're probably going to be impacted on how we can streamline things, how we can make ourselves more efficient. And so then I
Mhm.
switched that to we're taking a more proactive role with my team. And all we've said is, yeah, tariffs will have some kind of impact.
Mhm.
Are not clear today because those things are changing on a regular basis. But to wait until we have the full picture just leaves people going, I wonder how tariffs impact us. What's it gonna mean to us?
And if they're
You know?
watching the news, they can have
Yeah,
all kinds of stories going.
you can't escape it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly,
But
exactly.
in
Okay.
that situation, you're not even necessarily giving a ton of information. We're just saying, yeah, there's going to be an impact.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than say there's going to be an impact and we'll wait and see, there's going to be an impact.
Well, and I would
We
even
need to get
go
ahead of it.
right, and I would even take it a step further. I like what you said. I'd take that as an opportunity, and I would also set the intention. It is our intention to move forward and streamline and become more efficient, become more powerful through this transition with
Yep.
all of our people. What are your thoughts on how we could do that? Or let's be thinking about how we can do that as more information comes, so that we're setting the tone also of it's our intention to hold all our people, it's our intention to become streamlined, our intention to move through this as a whole.
Yeah, and you're shifting it from fear of the unknown
Yes.
or fear of what might come to we're now we now have some power back,
And
right?
it's an opportunity.
It's
Every
perfect
crisis brings
opportunity.
an opportunity for refinement.
And that is a mindset that everybody should have.
Yes.
And too oftentimes it causes some paralysis. It causes us to stop and hunker down
Yes.
than to, pause for a moment, take a deep breath, step back and look at the full picture and say, okay, what are our opportunities here?
Right, right. Where can we refine?
Because there will,
The other one I wanted to touch on was I don't want to burden my people or they can't handle the truth.
yeah, yeah.
So those two things are both seeing your people as weak. What do you say to those leaders who are like, I don't want to burden my people with all of this. This is my responsibility to bear.
And this is where we make things challenging on ourselves, right? We take on even a bigger burden of the work, and we have to remind ourselves that we've got good people working in our company, working on our teams. They have families, they run their own lives, they participate in their communities, their churches, their kids' programs. They deal with stuff all the time. It's not to say the only challenges happen at work, challenges happen at home. And so we have to take a step back and go, okay, I care about my people. If that's where it's coming from, is a worry, then I'm going to, flip my mindset a little bit and say, well, I care about them enough. They're good people. I need that. To me, pulls me to want to be more transparent with them, to be a little more open and to pull it in. And adults can handle stuff. I mean, they really can. And when we can tackle it sooner than later, we're talking before things become even bigger. And do you want to burden your team with stuff? No, but do you want them blindsided? Do you want them feeling devalued? Do you want them feeling not important? No. And if we can ask ourselves those questions, then it makes it easier to say, my team deserves to have more information. My team deserves to know this. And frankly, they probably got some great ideas that can get us through.
Is there any time that it would make sense for a leader to pause before sharing or to not share so much information? Is there a time when that would be appropriate?
I think that's a really good question. I mean, if we're talking about personal information about other team members, yeah, don't don't do that. You know, if the team member wants to share what's going on in their life with their other teammates, we let them do that. We're not the ones to jump in and share that. But outside of that, to me, I can't imagine that there's things that you don't share. Maybe we're not sharing all the specifics, the line item detail if the company's having some financial trouble, but we can still talk in general terms to say, here's the situation. We can speak, I hate to say in generalities, but we can give people a picture without providing every single step
Mhm.
along the way. And so
Okay.
start with the big picture in communication and be processing what is good and helpful for people to know right now, what's still uncertain. And if anything is, I'm feeling uncomfortable with sharing, I got to ask myself why. And if there's some kind of fear, if it's negative assumption, or if it's a trust issue, then we can peel back the layers and probably challenge ourselves. Because I would say more often than not, there really aren't things that you can't share other than, personal information about people.
Right. Right, right, right. And you said you've mentioned negative assumptions a couple of times. And just to clarify what that is, that's part of the curriculum that we teach, is that we can have filters from our past that live in our mind, and we're projecting those onto our current situation. So if we're assuming there's going to be a negative assumption that somebody's going to take this information and do something wrong with it, or they're not going to be able to handle it, or
Yeah.
any of those assumptions that we have that live up here.
Yeah.
So when we're having pause as a leader, it's not to ignore the pause, it's to investigate the pause. Is this an
Well said.
internal issue in my mind where I'm holding a negative assumption is there an external reality that validates what I'm feeling inside? And if so, then you got to look at the external reality, right? If you have an employee that you don't trust because they've broken trust, you got to pay attention to that and address it. But if truly you can't validate your fear with external reality, then it's a negative assumption. Then it's time for you to change your internal shift, and see your people differently and then
Yeah.
proceed accordingly.
We do in our workshops, when we do them in person, one of our exercises is we have people debate the pros and cons of team members making the final decision during layoffs. Well, that's a really challenging topic.
Wow.
What we do is they list all the pros for that argument, they list all the cons for that argument, and it's a robust discussion. And then we ask people, where are you at on this today? Given this discussion, are you a pro or are you a con? And we don't want to say that there's a right or wrong answer to that, because that's really a tough situation. And yet, when we go down and we look at all the cons, the challenge that we give back to them is what of these are based on negative assumptions? And a ton of them usually are based on negative assumptions. And that's the bit of the aha, which is, okay, well then how do I challenge that? People aren't going to go out if they have layoffs, the next week and involve team members necessarily. But we're saying, look, if we can challenge our assumptions, we can find that almost anything is possible, right? That we can look at things, if we can look at things differently, look at people differently, we can have much different outcomes than the way we've typically done them in the past.
Wow, yeah, that's like a whole nother level of trust and
Yeah,
transparency when you're
right.
involving the team and okay, we can't afford to pay everybody, so what are we gonna do? But I mean, the reality is, I think as an employee, I would much rather hear that than live with the fear of there's
Yeah.
gonna be cuts and who's gonna get cut and like if I know, but I guess the company, on the other hand, the company is like, well, I don't want people leaving too soon, right? So companies they have to really weigh out what is in the best interest of the whole and the
And
people.
that's where you get a few more people involved at a minimum, right?
Yeah.
What we need, what are the potential outcomes, what are the potential hurdles or concerns that we have, and how do we propose dealing with them? And then you'll settle on a plan that makes more sense. But when companies are laying off, doing reductions, I mean, there's fear that goes into it, and then
Mhm.
there's the survivor's guilt afterward. So if
Yeah.
I'm a person who made it, and you can ask anybody who's survived a layoff, it is still awkward.
Mm.
If I didn't get a ton of information ahead of time, I was worried.
Right.
I'm relieved for being able
For
to
a
do
moment.
the job for a moment, and then I'm feeling bad because people I know, people I like, people I worked with don't have their jobs. And
Or 2 months from now, I mean, there's always in the back of your mind because that happened,
when's
that
the
was a
next
breach.
one?
It was almost like it was a breach of trust. Like I didn't see that coming.
Yeah.
It happened, which is a breach of trust. So let's talk about how do we build trust in our organizations? Like, what are some baby steps that people can take, or what are some proactive steps that people can take today to say, okay, we want to build a culture of trust and transparency. I want to trust my people. I want to bring them in to help me solve these big problems. What are some of the foundational steps that they need to get to in order to start doing that?
Yeah, I love that because it is start early on, start from the beginning. Really, I'll go back to even on the hiring side of things. Hire not just for skill, hire more for attributes, quality of character, fit with the culture. Have a process in your hiring that involves more people because, have team members participate in the hiring process of one of their colleagues, have team members participate in the hiring process of a leader, do those kinds of things. But once somebody is on board, start building the relationship from the beginning. Spend some time with that individual to get to know them personally, not just here's your job, here's your work. Talk about their role, connect them to the purpose of the the role and the outcome, connect them to the mission of the company, connect them to their team members, ask what their desires and their interests are, have a conversation about expectations. You know, what you expect of them, what they expect of you. Have a conversation with the team about what teamwork looks like and what those team agreements are. So when you do some stuff from the beginning, you're starting to set the tone, and then you got to have regular one-on-ones, regular check-ins with your team. We're going to have meetings on the work-related stuff for sure, but set up dedicated one-on-ones with the mindset of this is the team members meeting, and they can talk about anything that they want to talk about. Doesn't matter if you do this once a week or even once a month, but it's what the team member wants to talk about. In a place that I worked, I had a team. The youngest was 22 and the oldest was almost 70. In those meetings, they talked about very different things. Kat was younger. She wanted to know more about the company, talk about opportunities. And Betty was wonderful. She wanted some quick updates on the company, and then she just wanted to talk about family. You know, her kids, her grandkids, my son. And that's where those meetings went. But that
Right.
one-on-one meeting was their meeting. And so we talked about the things that they wanted to talk about. We had all the other regular work meetings, the regular team meetings, but that one-on-one time is just a real opportunity to stay connected and build relationships with your team.
And that goes directly against what we've all been taught, to keep your people at a distance and
Yeah,
don't get too close. So you're saying the opposite of that. Spend
ab-
time with them, get to know them, who they
absolutely.
are as a person.
Yep. And that shows a vulnerability as a leader. And it's just, speaking for personal experience, it is, I don't know what's the word, rewarding. It's just nice to
Hmm.
know people on a different level.
Yeah.
You know, and I hadn't worked with that team in a really long time, but we stayed connected through Facebook.
Hmm.
Just, Betty is 90, just died just after she just died, passed earlier this year. And, she made it to 90, almost 90. I don't
That's
remember exactly, but those are relationships that last. We hadn't worked together in 20 years.
Yeah. And that's what the world needs more of. Connection. We're built for connection. We're wired for connection. And we have this whole society that we built that is opposite of that.
Yeah.
And so creating that culture within. So that's something easy that people can do right now, is spend one-on-one time with your people, get to know them, let them get to know you, share,
Yep.
share with each other. I just remember one story from my sister's funeral, and her people that worked for her came to the funeral, and I mean, there was two of them, and they were just like, they stood up and told stories about my sister. They were so like, loved her so much, and she was their boss. And one of them told the story about, we had a one-on-one with her, and I'd go in and she'd pull out her phone and show me pictures of her grandkids and ask to see mine. And that was their business meeting. That was their work meeting. So
Yeah.
they,
It
because,
makes a difference. And look, with your sister, it had a lasting impact
yeah, they would have
on
done
the
anything for
team.
her.
Yeah.
100%.
And
Okay.
you get so much accomplished, and it's so much easier. And then if you've got all that, then when the tough stuff happens, it's that much easier to deal with because we've got a strong foundation already.
Okay. Well, I hope that we've made the case for you to build trust with your people and build connections, because we know you're busy and we know you have a lot on your plate, and we know that it's hard to take that time because it's not productive. It's not moving us forward. It feels like, but that time spent in investing in relationships and connections pays off multiples in the long run. You can't have high performance without high trust.
Absolutely.
So thank you guys for being here. And you don't have to get it perfect. It's really about being real. It's about being connected to your people, and start playing around with this, playing around with trust and transparency, and see what happens. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. I know I have been. If you want to find out more about, learn more about this, learn from Gloria and myself and through the Heart Profit certification process, you can find out information about that at the heartprofit.org website. We'd love to have you come along the journey in transforming your workplace into a high-performing workplace where your people are thriving and the profits are thriving as well. So thanks for being here. We'll see you next week.